For over 3,000 years, one city has been at the crossroads of faith, power, and history. A city that has witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the prayers of prophets, and the clash of civilizations. This is Jerusalem, a city sacred to three of the world's great religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, yet fought over more fiercely than any other place on earth. Kings and conquerors have ruled this land. Temples have risen and fallen. Wars have been waged. And yet, Jerusalem remains. How did this ancient city become the heart of so many battles? Why does it remain one of the most contested places in the world today? To understand the present, we must journey back through the past. Join me as we uncover the entire history of Jerusalem, where faith meets history, and where the past is never truly past. Long before Jerusalem became a battleground of empires, it was just a small settlement, a village nestled in the rugged hills of Canaan. But over time, this modest town would rise to become one of the most significant cities in human history. Our story begins over 5,000 years ago, during the early Bronze Age, when small Canaanite tribes settled along a narrow ridge between valleys. This area had two things that made it ideal for early settlers: a natural water source, the Gihon Spring, and a strategic location along key trade routes. At first, Jerusalem was no more than a fortified village. The Canaanites, who were polytheistic, built small shrines to their gods. But little did they know, this land would soon be claimed by another rising power. By 1800 BCE, a group known as the Jebusites controlled the city. They called it Salem, a name meaning peace. But despite its name, war was never far away. Ancient records suggest that the Jebusites built a strong fortress around Salem, defending it from invaders. One of these records comes from the Bible itself, which describes a mysterious king named Melchizedek, the king of Salem, who met with the patriarch Abraham. Some believe he was a Jebusite ruler, while others see him as a priestly figure with deep spiritual significance. But the Jebusite rule would not last. By the 11th century BCE, a new kingdom was rising under a warrior king named David, and he had his sights set on Jerusalem. Around 1000 BCE, David, the ruler of the Israelite tribes, sought a new capital for his kingdom. The problem? The city of Jerusalem was still under Jebusite control. The Jebusites mocked David, believing their city was too well fortified to be conquered. But David had a secret weapon. According to biblical accounts, David's men discovered a secret underground water shaft, the Warren's Shaft. Under the cover of darkness, his warriors climbed through this tunnel, infiltrated the city, and opened the gates from within. And just like that, Jerusalem fell. David made it his new capital and renamed it the City of David. But it was David's son, Solomon, who would elevate Jerusalem to an even greater spiritual status. Around 960 BCE, Solomon built a magnificent temple, the first temple, on Mount Moriah, a site believed to be sacred. The temple became the center of worship for the Israelites, housing the Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred relic of the Jewish faith. Pilgrims came from all over to pray here, and Jerusalem transformed from a military stronghold into a holy city. For the first time in history, Jerusalem was more than just a city. It was a beacon of faith. But as we've seen time and time again, great cities do not remain untouched by war. Soon Jerusalem would face destruction, exile, and conquest, and its fate would be forever changed. For centuries, Jerusalem stood as the heart of the Israelite kingdom, home to the sacred First Temple. But as history has shown time and time again, power is fleeting. And in the ancient world, no kingdom was safe from conquest. By the 6th century BCE, a new superpower had emerged in Mesopotamia, the mighty Babylonian Empire, led by King Nebuchadnezzar II. And as the Babylonians expanded their territory, they set their sights on one of the most prized locations in the region: Jerusalem. In 597 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar's forces invaded Jerusalem, exiling King Jehoiakim and thousands of Israelites to Babylon. But the city was spared, for now. A puppet ruler, Zedekiah, was placed on the throne. However, when Zedekiah rebelled against Babylonian rule, Nebuchadnezzar responded with devastating force. For 2 years, Jerusalem was under siege. Hunger and disease spread through the city. Finally, in 586 BCE, the Babylonians breached the walls, storming the city in a wave of destruction. And then, the unthinkable happened. The sacred First Temple, the heart of Jewish worship, was set ablaze and reduced to rubble. The Ark of the Covenant, the most sacred relic of the Israelites, was lost to history. Jerusalem was left in ruins, and its people were taken into exile in Babylon. But no empire lasts forever. In 539 BCE, Babylon fell to a new rising power, the Persian Empire, led by Cyrus the Great. Unlike Nebuchadnezzar, Cyrus had a different approach to ruling. Instead of destroying cultures, he allowed exiled peoples to return to their homelands. Under Persian rule, the Israelites were permitted to rebuild their city and, most importantly, their temple. In 516 BCE, the Second Temple was completed, standing on the same sacred ground where the First Temple once stood. Jerusalem was reborn. For the next 4 centuries, Jerusalem thrived under Persian, then Greek, and finally Roman rule. But peace was always fragile, and soon another storm would descend upon the holy city. In 63 BCE, the mighty Roman Republic took control of Jerusalem. The city, now under Roman rule, became a political and religious battleground. It was during this time that King Herod the Great, a ruler appointed by Rome, began one of the most ambitious construction projects in history. Herod's Jerusalem was a city of splendor, with massive stone structures, aqueducts, and one of the largest temples in the ancient world. But beneath this prosperity, tensions between the Jewish people and their Roman rulers grew. By the year 66 CE, Jewish frustration boiled over into full-scale revolt against Rome. For 4 years, Jewish rebels fought against the Roman legions. But in 70 CE, Emperor Vespasian sent his son, General Titus, to crush the rebellion once and for all. Once again, Jerusalem was under siege. Roman catapults hurled flaming projectiles into the city. After months of brutal fighting, the Romans broke through the walls, and history repeated itself. The Second Temple, the heart of Jewish faith, was burned to the ground. Tens of thousands were killed, and countless others were taken as slaves to Rome. The Jewish people were scattered across the empire, marking the beginning of the long exile known as the diaspora. Once again, Jerusalem was left in ruins. But as history has shown, this city is nothing if not resilient, and its story was far from over. Jerusalem, once a city of kings, conquests, and destruction, was about to enter a new era. No longer just a political and military prize, it would become the spiritual center of 2 world-changing religions, Christianity and Islam. By the early 1st century CE, Jerusalem was under Roman rule, and tensions between the Jewish population and their Roman occupiers were high. It was in this environment that a carpenter from Nazareth named Jesus of Nazareth began preaching a message of love, forgiveness, and the coming of the kingdom of God. Many saw him as a prophet. Others believed he was the long-awaited Messiah. But his teachings challenged both the Jewish authorities and the Roman rulers. In the year 33 CE, Jesus was arrested, tried, and crucified just outside Jerusalem's walls. His followers claimed he rose from the dead 3 days later, and from that moment, his teachings began to spread like wildfire. The resurrection of Jesus and the belief in his divinity became the foundation of Christianity. Over the next few decades, his followers, known as Christians, spread his message throughout the Roman world. As Jerusalem burned once more in 70 CE, the Jewish population was scattered, and Christianity slowly began to separate from Judaism. But Jerusalem would remain sacred in Christian hearts for centuries to come. In the early 4th century, a dramatic shift occurred. The Roman Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity, and in 312 CE, he declared Christianity the favored religion of the empire. Constantine's mother, Empress Helena, traveled to Jerusalem, searching for the sites of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. She commissioned the construction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, built over what was believed to be the tomb of Christ. By the late 4th century, Jerusalem had transformed into a major Christian pilgrimage site. Thousands traveled from all over the empire to walk in the footsteps of Christ. For over 3 centuries, Christianity flourished in Jerusalem. But history had another twist in store for the Holy City. In the early 7th century, in the deserts of Arabia, a new faith was born, Islam. The Prophet Muhammad preached monotheism and a new way of life, uniting the tribes of the Arabian Peninsula under one God, Allah. Just a few years after Muhammad's death in 632 CE, Islamic armies swept across the region, bringing Jerusalem under Muslim control in 638 CE. Caliph Umar, the second successor of Muhammad, took control of Jerusalem peacefully. Unlike previous conquerors, he showed great respect for Christian and Jewish holy sites. He even prayed at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but refused to claim it, ensuring it remained in Christian hands. Under the Umayyad Caliphate, Jerusalem became one of Islam's most sacred cities. In 691 CE, the Dome of the Rock was built on the Temple Mount, marking the spot where Muslims believe the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven during the night journey. For centuries, Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived side by side in the Holy City. But this fragile peace would not last. Soon war would return to Jerusalem in the form of a bloody struggle known as the Crusades. Jerusalem, a city of faith, a city of conquest, a city of blood. For centuries, it stood as the heart of 3 great religions. But in the late 11th century, the battle for the Holy Land would reach a new level of intensity. What followed was one of the most brutal and transformative conflicts in history, the Crusades. It all began in 1095 CE. Pope Urban II, standing before thousands in the French town of Clermont, issued a call to arms. The message was clear: Christians must reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim rule. The response was overwhelming. Kings, knights, and even commoners took up the cross, donning the Crusaders' symbol and embarking on a perilous journey toward Jerusalem. Their goal: to reclaim the city from the Seljuk Turks, who had taken control of the region and reportedly mistreated Christian pilgrims. In June 1099, The Crusaders reached their prize, Jerusalem. But what lay before them was a city fortified, defended by experienced Muslim warriors. For weeks, the Crusaders besieged the city. Hunger and exhaustion set in, but their resolve did not waver. On July 15, 1099, they breached the walls, and what followed was a massacre that would be remembered for centuries. No one was spared. Muslim and Jewish inhabitants were slaughtered in the thousands. The Crusaders, believing themselves instruments of divine will, cleansed the city with blood. Even inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the killing did not stop. The First Crusade had succeeded. Jerusalem was now a Christian kingdom, ruled by Godfrey of Bouillon. But peace would not last. The Islamic world was rallying for revenge. In the late 12th century, a new leader emerged from the Muslim world, Saladin. A warrior, a strategist, and a man of honor, he vowed to reclaim Jerusalem for Islam. In 1187 CE, at the Battle of Hattin, Saladin achieved a decisive victory over the Crusaders. With their forces shattered, Jerusalem was left vulnerable. Unlike the Crusaders before him, Saladin showed mercy. Instead of slaughtering the city's inhabitants, he allowed Christian civilians to leave safely. The city that had been drenched in blood was now reclaimed with dignity. The loss of Jerusalem sent shockwaves across Europe. In response, three powerful kings, Richard the Lionheart of England, Philip II of France, and Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, launched the Third Crusade. Richard the Lionheart and Saladin became legendary foes, clashing in brutal battles across the Holy Land. Yet despite his military genius, Richard could not retake Jerusalem. In 1192, the two leaders reached a truce. Christian pilgrims were allowed to visit Jerusalem, but the city remained under Muslim control. Though the Crusaders had failed, their thirst for the Holy City was far from quenched. Over the next century, more crusades followed, but none succeeded in retaking Jerusalem. By 1291, the last Crusader stronghold in the Holy Land, Acre, fell to the Mamluks, marking the end of Christian rule in the region. The Crusades had changed Jerusalem forever. They left a legacy of bloodshed, but also cultural exchanges between East and West. And yet, despite the battles, the faiths that called Jerusalem home would continue to coexist, sometimes in peace, often in conflict. By the early 16th century, the power struggle over Jerusalem was far from over. The Crusades had ended, but new empires were rising. In 1517, a new force took control of the Holy City, the mighty Ottoman Empire. For the next 400 years, Jerusalem would be shaped by the policies, architecture, and governance of the Ottomans. In 1517, the Ottoman Sultan Selim the Free led his forces into the Mamluk-controlled territories of the Middle East. After a swift and decisive campaign, he seized Egypt, Syria, and Palestine, bringing Jerusalem under Ottoman rule. Unlike the Crusaders or Mongols before him, Selim I did not devastate the city. Instead, he declared himself the new protector of Islam's holy sites, ensuring that Jerusalem would remain a city of faith and peace, at least for a time. But it was Selim's son, Sultan Sulayman the Magnificent, who would truly transform Jerusalem. Under his reign, the city experienced a golden age of construction and renewal. Between 1537 and 1541, Sulayman ordered the construction of the iconic walls that still surround Jerusalem's old city today. These massive fortifications protected the city from invaders and preserved its sacred sites for generations to come. Sulayman also restored the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque, strengthening the city's Islamic identity. But he did not forget Jerusalem's Jewish and Christian residents. He welcomed Jews fleeing persecution in Spain and even funded repairs to Jewish religious sites, including the Western Wall. Under Ottoman rule, Jerusalem became a relatively stable and diverse city where Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived side by side. But as the empire grew older, so did its troubles. By the 18th century, the once mighty Ottoman Empire was beginning to weaken. Corruption, military losses, and economic struggles led to instability. Meanwhile, European powers, especially Britain, France, and Russia, began taking a growing interest in Jerusalem. European nations saw the Holy Land as both a religious and political prize. Churches, schools, and hospitals were built, often under the guise of charity, but in reality, they were signs of growing foreign influence. The city saw an influx of Christian pilgrims from Europe, leading to tensions between different religious communities. The Ottomans, struggling to maintain control, granted more privileges to foreign powers, further eroding their grip on the city. Then came the Great War. World War I. The Ottomans sided with Germany and Austria-Hungary, a decision that would seal their fate in Jerusalem. By 1917, British forces, under the command of General Edmund Allenby, launched a major offensive in Palestine. The Ottomans, weakened and outgunned, could not hold their ground. On December 9, 1917, the Ottoman governor surrendered Jerusalem to the British without a fight. 2 days later, General Allenby entered the city on foot, symbolically showing respect for its sacredness. After 4 centuries, Ottoman rule over Jerusalem had ended. A new chapter was beginning, one that would shape the modern Middle East and redefine the city's future. For over 400 years, the Ottomans ruled Jerusalem, sometimes with great care, other times with neglect. They built its walls, preserved its holy sites, and oversaw a city that remained a beacon of faith. But as the 20th century dawned, a new era was beginning. The British had taken control, and soon, the most complex and heated chapter in Jerusalem's history would unfold. December 9th, 1917. For the first time in 400 years, Jerusalem changed hands. Without bloodshed, the Ottoman Empire had collapsed, and in its place, a new force had arrived: the British. With them came promises of stability, modern governance, and progress. But little did they know, they were stepping into one of the most complex political and religious conflicts in history. When General Edmund Allenby entered Jerusalem on foot, he made history. Unlike past conquerors, he refused to ride in triumph, showing respect for the city's sacred status. But beyond the symbolic gesture, a new reality was unfolding. Britain was now in charge. The British established the military administration of Palestine, promising to maintain order. But tensions were already brewing. With the fall of the Ottomans, the region was now open to new political ambitions, especially concerning Zionism and Arab nationalism. Just weeks before capturing Jerusalem, Britain had issued the Balfour Declaration, supporting the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. This single document would ignite decades of conflict as Jewish immigration increased and Arab resentment grew. In 1920, the League of Nations officially placed Palestine under British rule, known as the British Mandate for Palestine. Jerusalem was now the administrative capital, undergoing rapid transformation. For the first time in centuries, the city was modernizing. Roads were paved, electricity was introduced, and public services improved. British architects designed new neighborhoods, expanding Jerusalem beyond its ancient walls. But progress also brought division. With British rule came increasing migration, especially of Jewish settlers escaping European persecution. This influx reshaped the city as Jewish, Muslim, and Christian communities began to drift apart. By the 1930s, tension had reached a boiling point. Arab leaders, feeling betrayed by the British support for Zionism, led the 1936 Arab Revolt, a 3-year uprising against British rule and Jewish immigration. The revolt turned violent. Arab militias attacked British forces, Jewish settlements, and infrastructure. In response, Britain deployed thousands of troops, cracking down with martial law. At the same time, Jewish resistance groups, such as the Haganah and Irgun, began forming, determined to protect Jewish communities and push for an independent Jewish state. Caught between two rival nationalist movements, the British found themselves overwhelmed. By 1939, they issued a controversial white paper limiting Jewish immigration to Palestine. But as World War II loomed, the Jewish population faced an even greater crisis: the Holocaust. The horrors of the Holocaust changed everything. 6 million Jews were murdered in Nazi concentration camps, and survivors desperately sought a safe homeland. For many, that meant Jerusalem and Palestine. But Britain, trying to maintain balance, blocked large-scale Jewish immigration, fearing further Arab unrest. This led to underground resistance movements. Jewish fighters launched attacks on British military sites, demanding an end to British rule. In 1946, the militant Zionist group Irgun bombed the King David Hotel, British headquarters in Jerusalem. Dozens were killed. The British now saw Palestine as an unsolvable problem, and they wanted out. In 1947, the United Nations stepped in, proposing a partition plan. Palestine would be divided into separate Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem placed under international control. Jewish leaders accepted the plan, but Arab leaders rejected it, seeing it as foreign-imposed division of their homeland. By 1948, Britain had had enough. On May 14, 1948, they officially withdrew from Palestine. That same day, David Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel. Within hours, war erupted. Jerusalem, the city of faith and history, was now the battleground for a war that would change the Middle East forever. The British mandate promised stability, but instead, it led to deeper divisions. With Britain gone, the fate of Jerusalem was now in the hands of two peoples, both claiming it as their own. The battle for the Holy City was about to begin. May 14, 1948, marked the end of an era. British forces withdrew from Palestine, and in their place, the newly declared State of Israel began its fight for survival. But one thing remained unchanged. Jerusalem was the heart of it all, contested by two peoples, both claiming it as their own. On that historic day, David Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel. But his joy was short-lived. As soon as the announcement was made, neighboring Arab nations, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, launched a military offensive against the new state. The Arab-Israeli War of 1948, also known as the War of Independence for Israelis and the Nakba, or catastrophe for Palestinians, was not just a battle for territory, it was a battle for Jerusalem. The city, divided between Jewish and Arab sectors, was the focal point of the conflict. Jerusalem became a battleground. The Old City, home to the Western Wall, Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, was fiercely contested. The Jewish forces aimed to capture the entire city, while the Arabs, supported by surrounding countries, defended it. The war escalated quickly. Jerusalem was under siege, with roads cut off and supplies dwindling. The Israeli forces managed to break through to West Jerusalem, but East Jerusalem, including the Old City, was captured by Jordanian forces, who had entered the fray on the side of the Palestinians. By the end of the war, Jerusalem was divided, with Israel controlling West Jerusalem and Jordan controlling East Jerusalem, including the Old City. The Green Line became the unofficial border. The city was now fragmented, with each side claiming the city's spiritual and political capital. In the years that followed, West Jerusalem flourished under Israeli control, becoming the center of Israeli government and culture. But East Jerusalem, under Jordanian rule, saw limited development. In the Old City, Muslim and Christian holy sites remained under Jordanian control, and tensions continued to simmer. Jerusalem was a city of contradictions, modern and growing in the West, historical and sacred in the East. The status of Jerusalem was still unresolved. But in June 1967, a spark ignited a new war. The Six-Day War, a conflict between Israel and neighboring Arab states, would dramatically change the city's future. On June 5, 1967, Israel launched a preemptive strike against Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. By June 7th, Israeli forces had captured East Jerusalem, including the Old City, and the Western Wall was in their hands for the first time in nearly 2,000 years. For many Jews, this moment was a profound religious and national victory. Jerusalem was once again united under Israeli control, but the question of the city's future remained unresolved. Should it be a capital for all, or a divided city with separate capitals for each people? Today, Jerusalem remains one of the most controversial cities in the world. The city's unification under Israeli control after the Six-Day War was never fully accepted by the international community. Palestinians continue to claim East Jerusalem as the capital of a future Palestinian state, while Israelis see the entire city as their eternal capital. The struggle for Jerusalem is more than just a political dispute. It's a battle over history, identity, and faith. Its sacred significance to Jews, Muslims, and Christians makes it a symbol of hope and conflict. Jerusalem stands at the crossroads of civilization, where past, present, and future converge. It is a city that has been shaped by conquests and faith, by war and peace, and by the dreams of all who call it home. Through wars, empires, and countless struggles, Jerusalem has endured. It is a city that has witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth of religions, and the forging of destinies. And though the future remains uncertain, one thing is clear. Jerusalem will forever remain a city of profound significance to the world. Jerusalem, a city of profound history, a place where faith, culture, and history converge. From its ancient beginnings to the ongoing struggles for its future, Jerusalem has remained at the heart of the world's greatest stories. As we look at this city today, we see the same walls, the same landmarks that have witnessed countless events throughout history. But the journey of Jerusalem is far from over. Jerusalem's significance continues to resonate in the hearts of millions. Jews, Muslims, Christians, and people of all backgrounds. It is a city that unites and divides, a city that holds meaning beyond politics or borders. And as we reflect on its past, we are reminded of the enduring power of history and its impact on the present. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What does Jerusalem mean to you? How do you think its complex history shapes its future? Let's continue the conversation in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the history of Jerusalem, be sure to subscribe to our channel Sacred Chronicles for more captivating historical content. Stay tuned for more stories that shape our world. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next chapter of history.